This conference will now be recorded.
Sign your name and put it in the basket and give me $1. No, just sign your name and put it in the basket. Okay, many of you know Mike as our favorite placer in the park, and he's been really different things. Okay, Mike is a 5-year veteran and resident of the park. He and his wife, Mary Ellen, moved here from the New Jersey shore. Mike has been an avid sailor since the 1980s and spent many a happy Wednesday night and weekend sailboat racing as a crewman. He's raced on the Raritan Bay, Long Island Sound, and Lake Ontario. He and Mary Ellen have owned 2 sailboats on the Hudson River from the Jersey shore. When the opportunity arose to be a guest crewman on the PrideOfBaltimore1, Mike jumped at the chance. And today he's going to tell us about his adventures on the Pride. And if you haven't signed up to go for it before we log in, please do so. Okay, Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Okay, well, welcome to the presentation. And what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to give you a little bit of information about what is the Baltimore Clipper. Then we'll talk about the birth of the Pride of Baltimore, a horrible tragedy at sea that occurred, the rebuilding of the Pride of Baltimore 2, and my adventures as a guest crewman. The Baltimore Clipper. Baltimore Clippers were built here on the Chesapeake Bay, primarily in the shipyards in the inner harbor of Baltimore at the end of the 18th century. And what made them unique was they were extremely fast and extremely maneuverable as opposed to all of the other tall ship sailing vessels of the time, specifically the British Navy vessels with whom they would eventually engage in the War of 1812. And we're going to hear about that now. Here's what was significantly different about the Baltimore Clipper. On the right, that's the shape of a typical tall ship hull at the end of the 18th century. The British warships, the freighter ships, everything had that bathtub shape to it to maximize how much freight it could carry, or how many people it could carry. As opposed to the design of the Baltimore Clipper here on the left, which you can see is a very shallow draft boat with a very sleek V-shaped hull, which enabled it to go very, very fast. It carried a tremendous amount of sail, which also helped it to be able to maneuver and move quickly in the water. The downside of the Baltimore Clipper was it was a very, very dangerous ship to sail. It could be tipped over, it could be, very easily, it could founder and sink because it would just not be as stable as these big bathtub-shaped ships. The Clippers were engaged as privateers by the United States government, specifically President Madison. During the War of 1812, our Navy was non-existent, for all intents and purposes. So they enlisted the use of these Baltimore Clippers, and they gave license to the captains and said, you can pretty much go out and do whatever you want to disrupt British shipping, British naval vessels, whatever you want to do, and you can keep all the spoils. You don't have to share them with anybody but your crewmen. So that is what happened, and there were many, many Baltimore Clippers sailing the Chesapeake that then engaged in this action. The most famous of these Clippers was known as the Chasseur, and it was captained by Mr. Thomas Boyle. And as you see what the slide said, he personally sailed across the Atlantic, and blockaded the entire United Kingdom with his one Baltimore Clipper. He took 17 British prizes. He defeated many British warships. He could literally sail in one direction, and as the British chased him, he would simply turn the boat around and come back the other way, and the British Navy vessels couldn't even make the turn. So he was very, very successful. And hence, the chasseur was known as the Pride of Baltimore. Okay. Fast forward to the 1970s. How did the current Pride of Baltimore ever come to exist? Because by the 1830s, the Baltimore Clippers had all but disappeared because of their lack of cargo carrying ability. They had no further use, they were not practical. So what happened? In the 1970s, and for those of you that are native Marylanders and Baltimoreans, in the 1970s, Baltimore was a disaster, as were a lot of American cities. And so at the time, the then mayor, Mr. Schaefer, who went on to become governor of Maryland, but at that time, Mr. Schaefer said, we've got to do something to bring Baltimore back. His vision led to the development of the Inner Harbor, which is what you see here on the slide. That's what the Inner Harbor looked like in 1970, which was not compared to what it looks like now. So he started that project, and along with it, he said, wow, wouldn't it be a great idea if we had a ship, a tall ship that represented the history of the Inner Harbor? They engaged on this adventure. Here's what they decided they wanted to do. They wanted a ship to be built that would be an exact replica of an 1800s Baltimore Clipper. Okay? They wanted it to function simply as a pleasure, for pleasure jaunts on the Chesapeake Bay. And most significantly, the city would actually own the ship in partnership with the state of Maryland. That was the political twist so that they could get money appropriated by both the state and the city government to build the ship. $500,000 was appropriated, and back in 1970, that was a lot of money. I don't know what the calculation would be now, but $500,000 was a lot of money. And they went ahead and they built the Baltimore Clipper. And here is it being built in the Inner Harbor in 1976. Now, I want to share some significant things about the construction of this ship specifically. It was built as a replica. Therefore, it had no bulkheads, no walls inside. It had no watertight compartments or watertight doors. It had no engine. It had what's known as freeboard. The distance from the water to the rail was only about 5 feet, so it was very low. If you were a crew member going below decks, you had to crouch because it was less than 5 feet to stand up, so it was a very cramped space. Needless to say, there were no other safety features on the boat. Hence, it could not be U.S. Coast Guard certified and could not carry passengers. So it was built, it was finished, and it was to function as a museum piece and simply stay docked at the Inner Harbor so that you could just go on and see what it was like when you go up to Massachusetts and see the Mayflower. It's not really a working Mayflower, it's just a little museum sitting at the dock. And that's what happened. Well, what ended up happening though is they hired a captain and a crew, and they ended up taking this Pride of Baltimore out into the bay just to see how it would sail. They loved the captain, and the crew thought it was the greatest thing in the world. They brought that idea back to the city of Baltimore, and the mayor, Mr. Schaefer, said, let's turn the Pride of Baltimore into an ambassador for the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland. And as you can see, for the next 9 years, the Pride went all around the world. It landed at 40 different ports. It went and it acted as economic development for Baltimore. It was to go to trade shows. They get businessmen to come on board and say, why don't you open your business in Baltimore or in Maryland? And it was an extremely successful endeavor, and it did very well. However, still could not carry any passengers. So it was simply the captain and the crew, as you see there in the slide right in the middle. Unfortunately, tragedy occurred. In 1986, there was a lot of terrorism going on, and if you remember, it's when they were hijacking cruise ships in the Mediterranean, the Achille Laura, they were hijacking aircraft, a lot of things were happening. The Pride at that point was supposed to stay in Europe and do a Mediterranean cruise, but the committee said, no, it's too dangerous, please bring the boat home. They sailed across the Atlantic, stopped in the Virgin Islands, left the Virgin Islands on the way to Baltimore, and about 300 miles off of Bermuda, the ship got hit by what's now called a microburst. It was 100-mile-an-hour winds. The pressure dropped so low, the boat literally got sucked into the ocean. The ship sank in less than 5 minutes. And of the 12 crew members, the captain and the 11 crew members, there are only 8 survivors. The captain, Armin Elsasser, Nina Shank, Vinnie Lazaro, and Tim Duckworth were lost at sea. They never even made it up out from underneath the deck. The ship went down that quick. To add insult to injury, because the ship didn't have appropriate safety equipment as it would today, the life raft did not inflate. They could not get the life rafts to inflate. 8 survivors floated on the ocean in uninflated life rafts for 4.5 days. Finally, one of the deckhands actually blew up one of the rafts. Okay, Ray, I know you know what that means. Tried to blow up these rafts by Maui. Blew one up. They were able to get in it. And fortunately, or unfortunately, none of the ships that passed them during the daytime were able to see them. But fortunately, a Norwegian freighter was passing by at night and saw their flashlight. They had one flashlight with one set of batteries, and the Norwegian freighter picked them up and brought them home to safety. So it was a terrible, terrible tragedy. And even today, if you go to Fells Point, the memorial on the right side of the slide, that's the memorial that exists for the Pride of Baltimore, and it's sitting right there at Fells Point, which is where the Pride is. So the public was responsible. The public had loved the idea of the Pride so much, the public demanded they build a new Pride of Baltimore, Pride of Baltimore 2. Money came pouring in, jars of pennies, jars of dimes, checks for $1.25, and checks for $100,000 came pouring in. They raised over $5 million and said, okay, we'll rebuild the Pride. The second political twist, the city of Baltimore said, we're out. Okay, so now the boat is no longer owned by the city nor the state, but it's a private nonprofit foundation that runs the current Pride of Baltimore 2. And here's the Pride of Baltimore 2 being built in the spring of 1987. Why I spent so much time telling you about how the first one was built is to tell you how the second one was built. The second Pride of Baltimore 2, is 50% bigger in volume in terms of how much water it displaces. It's 10% longer and wider. The freeboard, so from the water line to the railing, is now 7.5 feet instead of 5 feet. You can now stand up when you're below deck. You can actually stand up. It's about 6.5 feet. It has 5 watertight compartments with 3 watertight doors closing off the compartments. It now has 2 diesel engines, a generator, a water desalination maker, and all the electronics, radar, GPS, and everything you need to be safe at sea, as well as all of the appropriate Coast Guard life rafts and everything else. And it is now U.S. Coast Guard certified to carry passengers. And here, April of 1988, you see here's the new inner harbor, and it is the launching of Pride of Baltimore 2, and you can see the crowd, an enthusiastic crowd. There were thousands of people there to witness the ship that they had fallen in love with. It is currently America's most traveled historical ship. It's gone to all these places. Here's an example. It's gone 280,000 miles, 40 countries, 200 ports of call, and you can see it has been around the world multiple times. It currently is used, as you can see, when it's docked in Baltimore, free deck tours, and actually when it comes all around the Chesapeake Bay, various places, you can get on the boat, go on a day sail. You can become a guest crew member, like I did. They do education programs for the school children, and they have all kinds of community partnerships where they host cocktail parties and buffet dinners and things for politicians and anybody that wants to rent the boat, you know, make a splash. Okay, my adventure, the fun part. My adventure on the Pride of Baltimore 2. Applying to be a guest crew member. So being a New Jersey and not knowing anything about the Chesapeake Bay really, or the Pride of Baltimore, we're always looking for activities, things to do here as we explore the Eastern Shore. And Mary Ellen found the Pride of Baltimore site. She goes, hey, the Pride of Baltimore, it's going to be in Cambridge. Let's go. And we can do a day sail, or it's going to be here, it's going to be there. And then she pointed out, she said, you know, they do guest crew. Would you be interested in that? And I said, wow, that would really be a great adventure. I'd love to do that. So I got on the website and I applied, because you have to apply, they have to select, because there can only be 6 guest crew members on a voyage. I filled out my first page of the application and hit continue, and it came back flashing, you're over 65. Fill out the next 10 pages of medical data, which I did. And with my various health conditions, I was very, very disillusioned and depressed. I walked out, looked at Mary Ellen, and I said, well, thanks, but, you know, there's no chance they're going to allow me to sail on this boat. Well, time went by, 2-3 weeks, and I had put it out of my head. And then I got the email. you've been selected. So I did get selected to be a guest crew member. I was the oldest crew member on the boat. Next to Captain Miles. And I'd like to say a word or two about Captain Miles. Captain Jan Miles has been a captain on the Pride, on both the original Pride and the Pride of Baltimore 2. He has been the captain since 1981. So he has tons of experience. He's a remarkable individual. One of the things that's interesting is he was the captain on the original Pride when it was on its European tour in 1986. He sailed the boat to Malaga, Spain, put the boat in for, repairs. And it was at that point that the board of directors said, time for a crew change because we're going to bring the boat home. Captain Miles and his 11 crew members were put on an airplane and brought home. And the new crew, which was Captain Armin Elsasser, who had, and let me add, had just as much, if not more experience than Captain Miles. So it's not about qualifications. But that new crew is who brought the boat back and sent it. So Captain Miles and his crew, could have been the crew that went down, but they didn't. So he has a lot on his head, about, what it meant to be on that original Pride boat. But he was a great captain. Now, to be a guest crew member, you're expected to function as a working crew member. This is not hand me a cocktail, and what time does the DJ start? That's not how this goes. This is a working tall ship. So here's a photo of the crew. Now, the two gentlemen in the front are not crew members, and neither is the young woman here in the purple top. Those are guest crew members. This is a photo of a cruise. Believe it or not, they did a TV commercial for Lagavulin single malt scotch. So you see the barrels are barrels of scotch. And and they did a 30-second commercial for Lagavulin on the ship when they took this photo. But anyway, I wanted you to see this photo to point out some of the crew members. That's Captain Miles in the back with the white baseball cap on and the mustache. That's Captain Miles. He's currently 75 years old. To the left of Captain Miles is one of my favorite guys. He was the cook. I desperately, as a working member of the crew, I desperately wanted to cook because that's what I like to do. I like to cook. And I sat with him and we talked, and I said, his name was Ian. Ian, I'd love to help you, cook. And he said, Mike, I love your help, but the galley is as big as one of these round tables, and there's no room for more than one person. And said, and as all of you cooks at home know, we have our ways. He said, I have a certain way I do things, and I can't have anybody interrupt me. So I did not get to cook, unfortunately, but he was a great chef. It was interesting. I asked him how he planned the meals, because as an example, we were on a 4-day voyage up the Chesapeake. And he said, well, I really don't. He said, I go shopping, I buy produce, fruit, proteins, cereals, whatever, and I figure it out as the voyage goes on because of, and I didn't think of it, it's the weather conditions. So he may be planning, say, for dinner, we're going to have a piece of steak and, baked potato and a vegetable, but all of a sudden the weather comes up, the ship is leaning, we're heeling under sail, we're heeling, and the water's rough, and he says, you know what? That steak dinner just became beef stew. so that he could make it a one-pot meal that we could eat in a bowl. And he was very good about that. It was amazing the things that he made for us out of simple ingredients, very innovative, and it always met the conditions so that the crew members, we weren't in a position where we could sit and juggle, a long stem wine glass and pieces of cutlery. No, we were sitting on deck with the water splashing on you. You ate out of a bowl, and that's how it went, but it was very good. Another significant crew member I have to share with you is the young lady right here in the middle, the short young lady right here. She was the ship's engineer. She was responsible for everything below deck. The 2 diesel engines, the generator, the desalinization plant, all the toilets, the sinks, the light bulbs, any system that ran the ship, she was responsible for. And she was amazing. The captain and her had a great rapport when it came to the ship. I sat with her one afternoon, chatting, and I just said, you must have all kinds of licenses and degrees to be able to do all this. And she looked at me and she said, and by the way, she's only 25 years old. She said, no, I just was on my dad's boat in Hawaii since I was 5 years old, and I just picked it all up. So she learned everything, just sailing with her dad in Hawaii. So she was quite amazing. And just to show you how in tune the crew was with the captain, at one point in the voyage, the engines were on, the 2 diesels were running. And the engineer was up front on the deck, and the captain was at the stern of the ship where he's standing now by the wheel. And he yelled up to her, go down and check that port engine. It's running 100 RPMs less than the start. He could tell, he could feel the boat, and she could feel the boat, and she could go down and adjust things to that fine degree to know, how the boat was running. But she was absolutely amazing. The young lady with the glasses was the boat, what was called the bosun. She was responsible for everything above deck. All the lines, all the sails, all the rigging, everything that made the boat sail was her responsibility. And she really knew how to bark out orders to the crew to get them to do what they needed to do. So as you can see, the crew is mixed. They were all under 30 years old, all on a 1-year contract, and you can see the ratio of men to women. So it was quite impressive, and that's typically what a crew is made up of. So what did I have to do? Well, the first day we were in Norfolk, Virginia, and the captain said, the weather's a little rough and we're in no rush, so we're going to stay in port today. He handed us all pieces of sandpaper and a bucket of varnish, and he said, get to work. And we spent the whole first day sanding the boat and varnishing. So we had to do that. What we really had to do was we had to stand watches. And of course, what watch did I get? I got the midnight to 4 a.m. and lunchtime to 4 in the afternoon, which totally disrupted, your eating and sleeping pattern. So what would happen is, because they weren't going to, let's say this, you're a crew member. It's not a cruise ship. You eat when they tell you. You go to the bathroom when they tell you to go to the bathroom. You do what you're told to do. So as an example, dinner time was 7 o'clock. So I eat dinner at 7 and have to immediately go to bed. Get woken up at 11:30, go up on deck, stand my watch till 4 a.m., go back down, go back into bed, get woken up at 6:30 for breakfast, to have breakfast at 7 a.m., go back to bed, and then get woken up at 11:30 in the morning to take the 12 to 4 afternoon. So that was my path on the boat. But it was fun. So when you're on watch, what do you do? The main thing we did was we got to actually steer the boat. I got to steer the boat. It's one of the things. But what you had to do is you had to do safety inspections, hourly safety inspections of the boat. So you start at the front of the boat and you go all the way down to what's called the bilge, the bottom of the boat, the bilge, and you make sure there's no water leaking, that the bilge isn't filling up with water. You work your way back, you're checking the toilets, the showers, you're just checking the boat for safety, looking for leaks, you're looking for water coming in the cabins, anything like that. Then you get to the engine room. In the engine room, you take 1,000 different readings, the generators, how many amps, volts. You look at the diesel engines. If the engines are running, you're looking at the oil pressure. You're just doing all this stuff and writing all this down every hour. And then you finally get back into the navigation station and you look at the chart. Where are we? Are we on course? You're looking at the weather. There was a book where you would say, what's the cloud pattern we see? And you have to match it to a page in the book and say it's cloud condition number 6. And this all went into the captain's log. So they kept us quite busy. And of course, we had to help raise the sails, lower the sails, do all the things that the crew members did. So my adventure began in Norfolk, and here I started in Norfolk, Virginia. There's Mary Ellen and I. Mary Ellen saying goodbye to me, maybe for the last time. But there we are, getting ready to get on the boat. Here's what home looked like for 4 days. Okay, on the left here, that's what a cabin looks like, and it's actually smaller than a jail cell. That's the wall, so that's the width of the cabin is only about 4 feet. And you can see that it's 2 people, and everything that you bring with you goes on that bunk. Your bags go right there at the foot of the bed. And then you sleep alongside your luggage. You can see life vests are right there in case you need them. Then here's the main cabin. This is where we ate our meals. You can see the galley, that's in the back. That's how big the kitchen is. That's the whole thing. But it was actually quite fun, and it was quite nice. And you see all of the things in the ship to prevent things from spilling when the boat's heeling. You see on the table, you see the rails on the table, and you see that in the bookcases, there's things to keep the books from falling out. So it was quite fun. It was quite a great place to be. Here's where we sailed. Now, this is a photo of Mary Ellen's computer screen as she tracked the boat as it went up the Chesapeake Bay. So she wanted to make sure I was okay. So there's our voyage up the Chesapeake Bay. You can see where we were headed. And here's a photo of me at the helm, under sail, steering the boat. So there I was that was probably the lunchtime to 4 in the afternoon, obviously. So there I am steering the boat. And when we came out of Norfolk, we had company. We saw the periscope, and if you can see it, it's a little hard to see, but that's a nuclear submarine. He came up right next to us. The captain came out, waved. So, because they were on their way into the Navy base at Norfolk, and we had just left it. So that's why the submarine was right there. So that was pretty cool. And this is the only job I didn't do. I did not climb the 100-foot mast to help furl a sail. two of my fellow guest crew members in their 50s, I might add, did in fact, are up there on that yard, furling the sail they chose to do. They put on the harness, climbed up, hooked in, and worked up. So they're 100 feet off the ground, off the water.
Great shot.
Good shot. And the adventure ended in Georgetown, Maryland, which is on the Sassafras River, north of Chestertown. So we're up in, I guess, is that Ceciltown? But it's up in the northern reaches of the Chestertown. And I was very fortunate. I was the only crew member that had 3 beautiful women meet me at the dock to pick me up. Everybody else was scrambling for a ride home. I got 3 wonderful park residents to pick me up. So it was a very fun adventure. And here's where the Pride of Baltimore 2 is right now. She's in dry dock, getting repaired, painted, fixed up, getting ready for the 2022 season. And it's time for the drawing.
Anybody else want to put their name in the book?
I think we need to put your name.
Let me share.
For the book and then
Let me quickly share. The book is Pride of the Sea, and it is written by Mr. Thomas Waldron. Now, why this is a significant slide in photos, because Thomas Waldron used to write for the Baltimore Sun, and Mary Gillespie is a very close friend of Thomas, and was able to get me a copy of the book, not this book, but was able to get me a copy of the book signed by the author. So I have that one at home, but I like to share this one with whoever wins it, so you'll get to read all about the Pride. And this book is extremely comprehensive. It talks about, obviously, the original Pride of Baltimore, spends a great deal of time talking about the ordeal of the tragedy at sea and what has happened to the surviving 8 crew members since the tragedy, and about the new Pride of Baltimore too. So it's a fascinating read. I enjoyed it tremendously. So let's pick. I think I'm going to have Mary come up.
I was going to say Mary.
I think Mary should come up and pick.
And thank you, Mike, this is so nice to Mary.
Mary.
maybe Michael will want to.
My name is Mary.
And maybe Collins.
Mike Champa.
Mike Ciampa. There you go. And please, if anybody has any questions, I don't know when you want to kick me off, but anybody has any questions, it's Michael.
Anybody have questions about